Books on Tape presents The Republican Noise Machine, Right-Wing Media and How It Corrupts Democracy, by David Brock. Read by Michael Kramer. Introduction. The Republican Noise Machine. Since defecting from the Republican Party in the latter half of the 1990s and publishing a confessional memoir in 2002, I've discussed my right-wing past with politicians, political activists and strategists, academic scholars, student groups, fellow writers, and hundreds of readers of my book, Blinded by the Right, The Conscience of an Ex-Conservative. I'm rarely asked anymore why I changed or about the Baroque intricacies of the anti-Clinton movement, which I once participated in and then renounced and exposed. After a presidential election decided by the Supreme Court, the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11th, 2001, and the war with Iraq, politics has moved to a different place. Nowadays, when I talk about blinded by the right, people want to know not how I was blinded by the right, but how so much of the country seems to be in that position. For the first time since 1929, the Republican Party controls all three branches of government. Fewer people identify with the Democratic Party today than at any time since the New Deal. Conservatism seems the prevailing political and intellectual current, while liberalism seems a fringe dispensation of a few aging professors and Hollywood celebrities. People ask me, a former insider, how the Republican right has won political and ideological power with such seeming ease, and why Democrats, despite winning the most votes in the last three presidential elections, seem to be caught in a downward spiral, still able to win at the ballot box but steadily losing the battle for hearts and minds. While it is not the only answer, my answer is, it's the media, stupid. When I say this, in a more respectful way, to folks outside the right wing, I usually get either of two responses. Those who receive their news from the New York Times and National Public Radio give me blank stares. They are living in a rarefied media culture, one that prizes accuracy, fairness, and civility, that is no longer representative of the media as a whole. Those who have heard snippets of Rush Limbaugh's radio show, have caught a glimpse of Bill O'Reilly's temper tantrums on the Fox News Channel, or occasionally peruse the editorials in the Wall Street Journal, think I'm a Cassandra. They view this media as self-discrediting and therefore irrelevant. They are living in a vacuum of denial. Those who understand what I mean are either members of the media itself, have read media criticism books or internet sites devoted to the subject, or are in the political trenches every day dealing with the media. The gap between those who recognize right-wing media power for what it is and those who don't is wide and deep, as if they inhabit parallel universes. The gap is dangerous to democracy and needs to be closed. When I came to Washington fresh out of college in 1986, I got a job at the Washington Times, the right-wing newspaper bankrolled by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the Korean-born leader of a religious cult called the Unification Church. Though Moon's paper was said to be read in the Reagan White House, nobody paid much attention to it. We were the proverbial voice in the wilderness. Considering that the paper was governed by a calculatedly unfair political bias, and that its journalistic ethics were close to nil, this was a good thing. That was 18 years ago. Today, the most important sectors of the political media, most of cable TV news, the majority of popular op-ed columns, almost all of talk radio, a substantial chunk of the book market, and many of the most highly trafficked websites, reflect more closely the political and journalistic values of the Washington Times than those of the New York Times. That is, they are powerful propaganda organs of the Republican Party. For our politics, this development in the media represents a structural change, a structural advantage for the GOP and conservatism, and I believe the greatest structural obstacle facing opponents of the right wing. I therefore think it is one of the most important political stories of the era. I have sought to tell this story in The Republican Noise Machine, Right-Wing Media and How It Corrupts Democracy. I know there is a Republican noise machine because I was once part of it. From the Washington Times to a stint as a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, the right's premier think tank, to a position as an investigative writer at the muckraking magazine The American Spectator, and as the author of a best-selling right-wing book, I forwarded the right-wing agenda not as an open political operative or advocate, but under the guise of journalism and punditry, fueled by huge sums of money from right-wing billionaires, foundations, and self-interested corporations. By the time I said goodbye to the right wing in 1997, what was once a voice in the wilderness was drowning out competing voices across all media channels. The most influential political commentator in America, Rush Limbaugh, and his hundreds of imitators, saturated every media market in the country, providing 22% of Americans, not only conservatives but independent swing voters, with their primary source of news. Conservatives had changed the face of the cable news business with the establishment of the top-rated Fox News channel, a slicker broadcast version of the Mooney Washington Times. Pundit Ann Coulter and her fanatical ilk topped the bestseller lists, becoming superstars in the world of political punditry. The Spectator juggernaut, which had a circulation of 300,000 per month at its height in the early 1990s, had been replaced by internet gossip Matt Drudge, who gets more than 6.5 million visitors to his site every day. Although enormous subsidies were still being pumped into right-wing media that did not turn a profit, right-wing media also had become a multi-billion-dollar business, a development that powerfully affected all other commercial media. The lies, smears, and vicious caricatures leveled against Bill and Hillary Clinton by this right-wing media, and then repeated in virtually every media venue in the country, have now become well documented, not least in Blinded by the Right. In that book I compared the anti-Clinton propaganda to a virus as it seeped off the pages of The Spectator into the minds of every sentient American. My memoir ended in 2000. What I did not fully comprehend then, but what is apparent to me now as I have watched the politics of the last few years unfold, is that the virus was not Clinton-specific. In fact, it had nothing to do with the Clintons per se. Rather, in different strains, it would afflict any and every political opponent of the right wing, including Al Gore, Senate Democratic leader Tom Daschle, and the mourners of Senator Paul Wellstone, every major Democrat seeking the presidency in 2004, New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, and the liberal advocacy group MoveOn.org. What we have here, as a criminal investigator might say, is a pattern. In the 2000 presidential campaign, the Republican noise machine, which worked for years to convince Americans that the Clintons were criminally minded, used the same techniques of character assassination to turn the Democratic standard-bearer Al Gore, for many years seen as an overly earnest Boy Scout, into a liar. When Republican National Committee polling showed that the Republicans would lose the election to the Democrats on the issues, a skillful and sustained 18-month campaign by Republicans to portray the vice president as flawed and untrustworthy was adopted, the New York Times reported. Republicans accused Gore of saying things he never said, most infamously that he invented the Internet, a claim he never made that was first attributed to him in a GOP press release before it coursed through the media. Actually, Gore had said, "During my service in the United States Congress, I took the initiative in creating the Internet," a claim that even former House Speaker Newt Gingrich verified as true. The right-wing media broadcast this attack and similar attacks relentlessly, in effect giving the GOP countless hours of free political advertising every day for months leading up to the election. Albert Arnold Gore, Jr. is a habitual liar, William Bennett, a cabinet secretary in the Reagan and first Bush administrations, announced in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. Gore lies because he can't help himself, neoconservative pamphleteer David Horowitz wrote. "Liar, liar," screamed Rupert Murdoch's New York Post. The conservative columnist George F. Will pointed to Gore's serial mendacity and warned that he is a dangerous man. Gore may be quietly going nuts, National Review's Byron York concluded. The Washington Times agreed. The real question is how to react to Mr. Gore's increasingly bizarre utterings. Webster's New World Dictionary defines delusion thusly: the apparent perception, in a nervous or mental disorder, of something external that is not actually present, a belief in something that is contrary to fact or reality, resulting from deception, misconception, or a mental disorder. This impugning of Gore's character, and the questioning of his mental fitness, soon surfaced in the regular media. The New York Times ran an article headlined, "Tendency to embellish fact snags Gore," while the Boston Globe weighed in with, "Gore seen as misleading." On ABC's This Week, former Clinton aide George Stephanopoulos referred to Gore's Pinocchio problem. For National Journal's Stuart Taylor, the issue was The Clinton...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?